And then you have that situation 2008 where Werner Vogels, the Amazon CTO, says, hey, you build it, you run it. The developer should actually own the entire lifecycle. There is some truth to this, but as a response, we all hysterically started to throw the burden on the developer. And I think we did this a little too much.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 235, diving into platform engineering trends with Humanitec. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. Victor, you and I have been in this game for a very long time. How many times have you seen great announcements from places that not only was it not even started, it was pure vaporware?
Let's say daily through at least 20 emails I get from vendors before I unsubscribe from them.
And then you just ignore them from that point forward?
Yeah. Ignore them from... No, that's wrong. I don't ignore them from that point forward. I ignore them from any point.
So on today's show, we have Kaspar on from Humanitec. Kaspar, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So the premise that we're going to talk about today is, what is vaporware? It's sort of a funny thing, right? How do you define something that doesn't exist? We're not talking about what is vaporware, but we are going to talk about the hype cycles around platform engineering. In fact, we had a couple of guests on in episode 86 and episode 152 that had built their own platforms from scratch, cobbling pieces together. And they actually did it because they didn't have anywhere to go at the time. Now, things have changed, but Kaspar, how much of this really is still vaporware and how much of it is, maybe a little bit of reality?
The problem with all of these terms is that there are people and organizations, like some of the organizations that some of us here in the room represent, definitely including myself, that have commercial interests and that obviously piggybacking on important discussions that have to happen. So it has the two sides of the medal, really. That means there are things that are intrinsic to the technological development that had to happen at some point or are surfacing. And I think building platforms is one of those examples. We realized if you look at the rise of cloud native, maybe as a proxy of container adoption, then it's really taking off 2018, 19, 20. And then I think what you're seeing with a certain lag function is that people say, oh, this is complex. We can't just freestyle. We can't just have some people spin up things and then try to maintain this somehow. We have to have a little more structure to be respectful towards the users, that the developers, and we have to build something to help them operate this with more ease. We can't just throw everything at them and do almost abusive, in my opinion, shift left mechanism. So there is something very relevant and very important there, and I think organizations have realized this with a lag function of 3 to 5 years. If you look at the early pioneers, if you want, companies like Mercado Libre, Bol.com in the Netherlands, they've started to build these things early on because there wasn't anything out there. And then you have observers, if you want, like myself, I'm really including myself there, coming in and saying, okay, there seems to be a zeitgeist. Can we give it a name? Can we help people build these things more effectively or easier, or avoid a little bit of the try and error that these early adopters had? Some of these, including some of the things that I've done, have the genuine intention of helping the community, and some have commercial dimensions and some commercial aspects. And this is where it's getting difficult. So the short answer is platform engineering, in my opinion, is something that's genuine and that had to happen, and I think is a valuable evolution, if you want. It's not contradicting anything. It's just an evolution. It's a new answer to an ever-evolving problem. But we are obviously in a hype cycle situation where all of the consultants smell that you can make a lot of money. There are a lot of vendors. There's a lot of noise. There are a lot of people that have probably not seen so many setups at scale that are screaming very loudly. At this point, it's getting vaporware and it's getting problematic for the consumer.
I agree. I would say that almost all hype cycles are actually coming at the right moment with the right thing, but being surrounded by vaporware, right? I couldn't imagine a better time to actually work and provide solutions around developer platforms or whatever that would be called, right? Because certain things are in place that did not exist before, right? Containers are enablers of that thing, and Kubernetes is enabler that didn't exist before, and cloud adoption is finally at the levels that enable that as well, right? And so on and so forth. So the time is right, and it's almost always right for any hype. But the real problem there is, and I include myself in whichever company I was at, whichever moment, right? It would be silly not to take advantage of the hype, but then it's very complicated to distinguish who is just taking advantage of the hype because they have something really to give to that hype, and who is taking advantage because, hey, I can put another sticker, right? Right now, we can see that with AI. Every company is putting AI word somewhere. Doesn't matter what you're doing, right? You can be building a container image. You're doing it with AI, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm also refusing to participate. I mean, this is just so inflationary, the amount of stuff that people put there, like AI observability and using, like, in the end, pinging the ChatGPT API to do a comparably simple operation. But you're right, yeah. So, yeah.
The curious thing to me related to platform engineering or developer platforms or whatever it would be called is that only relatively recently we have vendors providing solutions for it, at least in bigger numbers. But companies themselves have been doing that, end user company have been doing that for decades. I mean, every bigger enterprise I worked with in the past had some attempt, without calling it platform engineering, so forget that name, but some attempt building something that will help somebody do things in an easier way, right? That could be writing shell scripts, simplifying Terraform modules, stuff through modules, writing Jenkins jobs for them, and so on and so forth. There was always that attempt. But only recently industry realized, or vendors, that actually they can build solution around it.
I think you've already answered why this is the case. It's because you have convergence in the technologies used, and there is a high degree of sanitization today. I really like what you said, and it totally resonates with me, because if you have a bunch of pipelines, what else is this but a platform, right? And if you think this through, you cannot not have a platform. If you are like a software organization has a platform, the question is, do you build the platform by piling things on top? Or do you start to treat this as a product and say, okay, let's take a step back. Can we apply product principles? How can we architect this in a way that it's easier to maintain, that it's sustainable, and that it's delightful for the user to interact with. And I'm not sure whether that was always the case with the combination of Jenkins scripts that we've seen the last 10 years. Now, the sole reason, in my opinion, vendors can now attack the space is containerization, Kubernetes, Terraform, because you have a high degree of standardization in those components already. It's just ultimately more complex to find repeatability in a VM setup, to be frank, and which is also so many companies coming to us, for instance, and saying, hey, you're only focused on containers, but we also have a VM estate and we also have a serverless estate. And then my answer is always, platform engineering is also about 80-20, right? You do 80% of the things right, but there's always the 20% of the estate that is probably not fitting in your Gauss distribution, and it's very hard to cover that as well.
You just mentioned VMs, and that's one of the things I never truly understood. Why did we, and when I say we, I mean we as the industry in general, why didn't we apply principles which we associate with containers today with VMs? Because it's almost the same, right? You can and should build an image. You instantiate that VM from the image that is ready to go, contains everything you should have. You schedule that image to become a VM somewhere in EC2, as EC2 in AWS or wherever. It can easily follow the same principles as containers, yet almost nobody realized or saw those principles until containers came. I mean, I know that containers are easier than VMs, but conceptually, it's very, very similar.
My feeling is that the answer is the Kubernetes API. So it was just that at some point we said, as an industry, hey, it makes sense for us to all standardize on. I mean, even containers it's an okay format, right? But I can also have my criticism with containers itself, even with Kubernetes, but whatever. As an industry, we said, and we can have many different flavors of running VM, and it's almost, you can express a lot of different things that then lead to seemingly similar material states, but the path to get there differs a lot. With the Kubernetes API as an industry, we've just said at some point, hey, this is what we all agree on, how orchestration should be done. And then it happens to piggyback on the container format, right? But I don't think it's more VM versus containers. It's more the layer beneath has seen a high degree of adoption from the big cloud providers. Amazon surrendered at some point and said, okay, let's use Kubernetes and make things actually exchangeable. And I think that was the big breakthrough that then made this platform thing possible, really. Because for us, we can only build things if we can repeat them 1,000 times. And it's really tough to build something on VM that you can repeat 1,000 times with an efficient go-to-market motion. I mean, this is how these models work, or they don't in the end.
True. You mean because you as a vendor would need to figure out how to repeat that on 100 different platforms, right? How do I provide a solution that works in Azure, AWS, on-prem, Google Cloud, Alibaba, and what's or not, right?
And that's impossible. And I need to find at least, look at HashiCorp, right? I don't know. They have 700 customers that spend more than XK on Terraform Cloud. The models of these vendors are always the same. Like, how many leads do you throw in on top? Then how many people really need what you're building? And what's the cost of acquisition? And can I afford my engineering team for the equivalent of amount of revenue that I'm making? Now, if we're talking about vaporware, there's obviously hundreds of millions of venture capital money in that whole platform engineering thing now, which means there are a lot of solutions nobody needs or that are not meeting that mathematical model. But if you want to look at what survives long term, it's how many people do need something that I can build in a high quality, in a repeatable and I sell in a repeatable way, but I build with the same number of engineers in my engineering team. And does that mathematical model make sense? And before Kubernetes, that mathematical model just didn't make sense. And that's my understanding.
I want to go back to something that you said early on. You said the abuse of shift left. What do you mean by that?
I think that there's this counter reaction that we had to the throw over the fence times, if you want. And the throw over the fence times for me was 2010, sysadmin, the developer builds something and then takes this and the configs and throws this over the fence to operations and says, guys, can you please take care of rolling this out and installing it and deploying it? And that was a model that is not very productive because for all of the reasons that we all know and the interdependencies. And at this point, we basically almost abused the operations people because we said, it doesn't matter how we build things. We're throwing it over them and it's on them to care. And then you have that situation 2008 where Werner Vogels, the Amazon CTO, says, hey, you build it, you run it. The developer should actually own the entire lifecycle. And there is some truth to this, but as a response, we all hysterically started to throw the burden on the developer. And I think we did this a little too much. And all of a sudden, the developer has to deal with the business logic and the Terraform files and the Helm charts and maintaining this and making sure it's security compliant and all of this. And that at the same time, and as a result, in my observation, we're seeing productivity and deployment frequency go down, and then managers say, hey, deployment frequency is going down. Why? Can you please type faster? We are in an incredibly unproductive cycle of people trying to prevent the throw over the fence model, and the response is to just throw stuff in an uncontrolled way at the developer. And yeah, I think that this is abusive because you're asking people to do their job and then do the job of other people as well. You can't get rid of work and complexity. You can only shift it in the organization. And by just shifting it in an unstructured way left, you are not helping and you're not changing things. And there's one observation that I made. I mean, and also this brings us back to the vaporware conversation. I think as a industry, we have the tendency of taking single sentences of people out of the context and then optimizing on these sentences. Werner Vogels said, you build it, you run it in 2008, but you have to understand the context. It was the context of a person that had to sell a vendor product. It was the context of the person that was the CTO at a comparably small organization, if you compare that to the degree of scale of enterprises that are now all of a sudden all shifting left and all living this you build it, you run it. And that's where I think we are misinterpreting the concepts that people come up with. And this is a dangerous game to play.
From my perspective, there is definitely abuse, but I think that there is a problem before we reach that, hey, this is the abuse of engineers or whatever you named it. And that's simply that it's... And what I'm going to say, I think relates to that missing context. And that's that it cannot be done. It cannot be done in terms that such an attitude, which is similar to full stack development, I think, assumes that the people on the left overnight become DBAs and ops and sysadmins and overnight gain the knowledge that combined would take 75 years to get. I think that's the bigger problem than even abuse, right? Because if you shift everything to that team as is, by saying, here's a credit card, go to Amazon, right? And then do everything. Is that simply there is no knowledge, there is no experience to do it. And that's the missing context, I believe, that people are forgetting about AWS. There, you build it, you run it, was always backed by other teams who created services that enable people to build it and run it, right? Hey, here's an interface at that time that will allow you to spin up a database you need, right? Without becoming a DBA. And not excluding DBA still being able to help you, right? I'm using DBA as an example. It applies to 57 other areas, right? So that's the full stack attitude, I believe. Hey, you can be a front-end developer and back-end developer and then spin up a database and you can do it all, right? Except that it will never work, at least not at any decent scale. But not because we abused you, there is that as well, but simply because you cannot know that.
What I mean by abusing them is we're abusing them by expecting the same throughput and speed, and then we're putting something on top that requires completely new qualifications if you want to do it correct. We are always assuming things are so much simpler than 10 years ago, but that's not the case, right? The applications, the user bases we serve, the applications we're building run the world. Billions of people run on them. They are complex. They are being attacked. They are having to run in different data centers, replicated with all of these things. And if something doesn't get simpler, you're just shifting the work on top of what you're doing right now. And that's just simply unproductive. And I think we're the only industry that I'm aware of that has actually in the last 10 years decreased the amount of separation of focus and specialization. Like, why would you decrease the amount of specialization? DB teams are very valuable. It's a specialization. It's a specialization we need. And React developers are very valuable. It's also a specialization we need. But we can't mingle all of this together.
I would modify slightly. We cannot mingle all of that together without creating other different layers of abstractions, those that are more appropriate for the level of experience, right? And I think that's where actually we get those discrepancies. Hey, you have DBA person who is actually managing databases. You want a developer to manage database, but with the tools designed for DBA. That's where the discrepancy comes in.
And this is where smart abstractions, if you want, opaque abstractions, are so valuable, where you say, I need a database. Sure, okay. What type of database you need? Okay. Anything special about this? No. Okay, let's go. We pull a lot of source of observation information from the way Google is doing things internally. And I was always fascinated. How is it possible that Google engineers accept a higher degree of abstraction? And the observation that we made is like, it's not that they're abstracted. They trust the DBA team. There are specialized teams that do certain things. And then the developers can request them. But these handover points are designed in a way where they are opaque. People are okay with taking simplified interfaces as long as they can see the configurations and how the actual resource is materialized under the hood. It's okay not to be able to configure something as long as you can see the configuration.
You said earlier, we're probably one of the few industries that can't really just stop doing things. I'm rephrasing you a little bit. What you said was, we can't get rid of work, we can only shift it. Why can't we just get rid of work? Here's my example. Down the street from me is a fast food restaurant. They are closing for 4 months to put in a second drive-through. So during those 4 months, they're not selling anything. That store is closed. There's zero revenue. But in our world, we do that, we go out of business.
Mm-hmm.
So, but why can't we actually model what's happening in the physical world and just say, look, we're shutting down for 4 months. Yes, that means no revenue. That means, yes, we've lost clients for however long, but we're going to come back stronger in the end.
My opinion is that the organizations are still managed by people that have very little context of how software works in the end. It's very hard for these managers to understand that just as you would need to maintain hardware, you need to maintain software. It's sometimes very important that you take a break and you think about how would we do it if we build it from scratch again? That just doesn't happen often enough. There's way too little acceptance from the management layers to invest in cleaning up. And because we don't do that, it's really hard for us as an industry to yield the results of technological progress. I'm seeing that every day, people saying, oh yeah, I understand that this is the better architectural approach, but we've invested so much in our horse equipment and you're coming with a car. It's just really tough for me to justify this in front of my management, why we need to make that swap now.
You went even further back, horse and car. I don't know if there is an answer. I wish there was an answer. But bottom line is, unfortunately, we've gotten addicted to this thing called money and revenues that, people seem to like getting a paycheck. I don't understand why.
I think it's in big part because of, as you said, money, but not money as in directly revenue, right? But because you're either chasing the next funding series coming around the corner, or you're chasing this quarter's results if you already went public, right? So you're always chasing something that is a quarter away at most, right? So what you're describing, Darin, would, I believe, for something like that to happen, that company would need to be privately owned, right? To be able to see beyond the quarter.
Yeah, definitely. And then there is another thing that's at play here. As the software engineers, we've always been the ones innovating and automating away others, if you want. We've been the disruptors. We're seen as the disruptors. We're seeing ourselves as the disruptors. My observation is a little bit that because we are seen as the disruptors, we have lost sight of the fact that we can be disrupted as well, and that how it feels to be disrupted, and that it's sometimes very fruitful if you want to advance as a human being or in your career to be disrupted and to then adapt to the new circumstances. So to give you an example, in a well-run organization, I like to look at the relationship between how many full-time equivalent operations, platform engineer, DevOps people, whatever name you want to give them, do you need for what number of developers? And in extremely efficient setups, you need one platform engineer, one ops, whatever, for 40, 50, 60 developers. And in many organizations that I'm seeing, it's like 1 to 10 or 1 to 20. And a little bit of the problem is as well that you're going to them and saying, guys, actually, if you would set up your things well and you would invest into modernization, you can run this whole shop a lot more productive. And nobody likes to hear this. If you've spent your entire life disrupting others, you are increasingly blind to the fact that you can be disruptors as well.
On top of that, you're also indirectly telling that person you should reduce the headcount, and the importance in your company comes from your headcount.
Exactly.
So basically, what you're indirectly saying is that I can lower you on the corporate ladder.
Yes. And nobody's ever going to do that, right? The reality would be that they know deep inside them, if it's not now, it's going to be in 5 years. I'm buying myself time. The rational answer would be, okay, I need to retrain. But that's not something that a human being is going to be able to say if that never happened to them in their career, right?
And yes, once it happens to you, you quickly realize, are you going to say, do you want fries with that? Or are you going to be learning a new skill?
Yeah.
And even now, you can't even say, do you want fries with that? Because all of that's now automated.
And I'm observing this with myself. I'm seeing LLMs come up, and I'm observing my children, how fluent they are with these new technologies. I even already had that with social media, Snapchat. I never really got Snapchat. It's not that I'm like, it was like, it felt not intuitive to me. I can see how fluent they're already working with these LLMs as if it would be like an extension to their brain. I'm looking at this and from a rational perspective, I understand that I need to change my behavior and my way of working maybe. But I can observe myself getting tired looking at this and saying like, not again.
Tell me about it. Not again. I've been through a few of these cycles already. And yes, it's not again. We talked earlier about solutions that nobody needed. Without naming names, what are some of the ones that you've seen that you just went, nobody needs this at all?
That's a slippery slope. I think the right question for me to ask is, what type of profile needs this? Let me give you a concrete example. I think the product we're building is something that you do not need if you are 20 developers. It's like you could do it, but you could also take a tractor for grocery shopping, and it's probably not a great idea. If you are dozens or hundreds of developers, it's a fantastic product. So it really depends from what angle you're looking at things. It's not that there are a lot of things that nobody needs. Walking through the last KubeCon, or I wasn't at the last KubeCon, but the one before, I thought there's comparably little stuff that's making a groundbreaking difference, and it's creating 10x more value than what we had. There are few things like the spark that we saw with the cloud itself, Docker maybe that's the more balanced response.
I noticed that as well, but outside of the context of the conversation, I found that actually positive in terms that I feel that that's happening in big part because we are finally consolidating into something that makes sense instead of just throwing people random things on a daily basis, right? So I see it almost as consolidation of the area of the market, right? Which, this is my prediction, and I'm willing to take a bet with anybody, is going to change in Chicago in a few months. It's going to be another round of something completely new, and it's going to be AI. I guarantee that half of the vendors it's going to, now it's another cycle of now it's everything new. No matter whether that's really the case or no.
And in reality, nothing will change, right? Nothing. It's it's like we are using ChatOps is the next big thing. And I mean, you're using Slack to make an API toggle to GitHub Actions. There's no change. It's everything as before. I mean, the thing that was vaporware for me a little bit was serverless, to be honest, with, lots of dreams and promises and buzz around that has never really been able to move out of its niche and makes a lot of sense for very specific use cases. But I have a hard time seeing that go mainstream in its current legacy implementation.
I'm guessing when you say serverless, you mean functions as a service, right?
I mean functions.
Yeah, exactly. I still have high hopes for serverless in terms of here's my code, run it. Not necessarily as functions, right?
Yeah. So Cloud Run, that's something. But I mean, like functions-based is something that I'm, questioning.
Victor, you pulled back the curtain just a little bit. This episode's releasing on November 1st, and of course, KubeCon has already happened.
Oh.
So,
I'm going to blame myself. I'm old. I forgot that I was on KubeCon 2 weeks ago.
Well, no, I think at least the way that we're talking about it, I think you're prophesying correctly, is that you're going to see more AI at this year's KubeCon than you will have seen Docker talked about at the initial KubeCon.
Yes. Yeah. It will be massive. And I already noticed, like, with VCs, if you speak with VCs, they're asking for AI as well, for when you discuss about funding and things like that.
I'm going to go ahead and stick my neck out into the guillotine and just say, if you're just making a call to open AI, that's not AI.
Yeah. Correct?
I wouldn't say it's not AI. It is, but that's a silly wrapper that anybody can reproduce and kick you out from that idea over the weekend.
It's not defendable, right?
Yeah.
In any way. And you're not achieving anything. And you've not actually innovated anything. You've just iterated on your messaging. And you've not iterated on your messaging because you think it provides value to the customer. You've iterated on your messaging because of what you think VCs will hear. And unfortunately, sadly, really sadly, and this is exactly how this VC-driven industry works. And after seeing the change between 2021 markets and 22 and 23, which was incredibly hard to manage because nobody knew what the capital markets actually want, you then had Bitcoins and crypto and all of this, and was always thinking like, my God, like, are they really running in that direction? And now it's AI. And when all of these high-profile VC companies started to fund vector embedded databases, that was the point where I thought, wow, has it really gotten that far? And it's only because we're building Potemkische villages, and this is a self-fulfilling prophecy where LPs are giving you money and then you're investing, and then the valuations have to increase in order for you to signal something back. And whether that's the truth or not, it doesn't really matter until the fund closes, because in between you're getting your carry fees. And so there are a lot of things wrong with this model.
Once you realize it's nothing more than a simulation and it's not real life, that's where it all starts to click.
Yes.
So one statement you said a few moments ago was, if there's less than 20 developers in your organization, you don't really need your product.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very bold statement coming from the CEO. I would have expected maybe, okay, if there's less than 5, but less than 20, 20 is a measurable number.
Yeah, but I think it's the truth. I mean, I'm also telling that to organizations. Like, that's the thing. Is the question, what type of company do you want to build? Do you want to build a company that gets the next funding round, but then is becoming a walking dead? Or do you want to build a company that builds something that has long, substantial value? And in our world, the first year revenue that I'm making with a client is maybe great for the books, but it's not making the company survive. I really care about year 2, and I really care about year 3 and 4 and 5, long-term partnerships. If I'm recommending something to a customer where then they realize that there is no value in year 2, my whole mathematical model of the organization that I represent does not make sense. So I have, for myself, no incentive to recommend this to people where they're not realizing the value in the end.
The Walking Dead.
The Walking Dead.
I've
everything what
never,
we're all afraid of.
Well, we're living in a simulation. The Walking Dead are all around us. And we're just trying to get to Christmas, I think. So Humanitec actually has, you were talking about less than 20, but you do have a free forever tier today. For up to 5 users, community support is what you expect. People can just use it, right? Up to 5 users. What's that experience like for them?
I think the experience to use Humanitec's free trial is terrible. And I think we're doing a very bad job in explaining the beauty of the architectural model. I think this idea that Humanitec has, which, by the way, isn't my idea, it's the idea of the engineering team around Chris Stevenson, is really brilliant. The idea is to say, if you really want to break it down, is to say one should not take existing configuration that you write for every environment and then sync it and go through lots of code that you need to maintain. You should actually dynamically create the app and infrastructure configurations with every single deployment. And you should do this by taking an abstract recipe from a developer. My workload needs a database of type Postgres and a file storage of type S3. And that should run through the CI pipeline. And then a component that we call the platform orchestrator reads this looks at the context and says, oh, this is being deployed to an environment of type staging. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to create the configurations? How am I supposed to update or create the infrastructure? It's looking at baseline configurations provided by the platform team. It's then dynamically generating everything and now at this point handing this over to an Argo CD or running the deployment itself. And what you're getting is exactly that very easy to consume abstraction for the developer. Could be API, CLI. We have a code-based version to do that. Could be through a developer portal like Pod or Backstage. And then you get the separation of concern. The platform engineers can focus on the baselines. And this leads to an incredibly high degree of standardization. And because we are dynamically generating these configs every time, you can say, hey, I want to upgrade all my Postgres from 14 to 15 across all the workloads that depend on that resource definition. And rather than having to go through 400 different minor differences in configuration, you do this in one place. And the next time the workloads deploy, it will automatically propagate through and make sure everything is updated everywhere. And that means in the end, you have 90% less configuration files to maintain. And it's becoming way more structured and lean.
I think you left off one thing on that. It was that we're going from Postgres 14 to 15, and now I'm turning in my vacation request because I'm leaving as soon as that starts.
Yeah, exactly. And you're getting all of these, hey, can you please do this? You still have something on 14, and a lot of communication between teams. I mean, there are dozens of different examples. Like, it's a solved problem that you want to scaffold a new service and start from scratch. The greenfield is not really the problem, but you have a workload, you want to add a new DNS, a new file storage. But how do you do this? In the old world, you go into all of the different files and you get your resource, and then you make sure that you have your application environment set in your app configs, and then you make sure that everything is wired with secrets, and you do this for dev, you do this for staging, you do this for production. And this is okay in a team like 20 developers. Everybody can talk to each other. If you're at large scale and security is involved and you need to follow certain compliance methods, then it's becoming incredibly difficult and time-consuming. And in our world, you're opening a file, you amend your workload specification, you say, I need a file storage of type S3, you send that through your CI pipeline, you indicate that you're now going to dev, this is created using Crossplane or Terraform or whatever, dependencies are injected automatically. Once you're happy, you say, hey, git push, now the target is staging, same thing repeated, now production, you're done. Always the latest version, always up to date, security controlled by a central team that is focused on this. And that's, in my opinion, the really the superior operating model. Again, only possible because we have organizations like HashiCorp, Crossplane, and the likes that make that possible.
So Humanitec is at humanitec.com. That's human, HUMANITEC.com. Even though you said you are doing a disservice to people on the community version, go check it out.
We're not doing a disservice. I think we could be better in terms of our developer documentation. We're working very hard on this. We're relaunching a new free trial experience. It makes sense to dig below. The community version comes with all features. We're not fencing anything, but the beauty lies in the API, in our Terraform providers, in the interplay with SCORE. And we're running great POVs with people where we give them end-to-end platforms, even including portals to test this out thoroughly. And I think this is a great experience. And this experience is coming to the community version early in October. So we are getting better.
So since this is coming out November 1st, then by the time you're listening to this, that new experience should already be there. In fact, I'm giving you 4 weeks to roughly have it a little bit of buffer there, just in case you slip. By the way, docs are hard.
Correct.
Kaspar, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.